Shana Tova. It is really wonderful just to see you, just to be here. Honestly, I didn't really think we would make it here. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, oh, by high holidays, we'll be okay. By the next year, we'll be okay. By the next year. Well, it's that next year. And how wonderful, at least to have a semblance of where we want to be. And it's been quite a time for our community. It's really nice to be able to see one another. So much changes in just a couple of years. It's really remarkable. And I think only when we gather together in these moments, like on Rosh Hashanah, do we really notice the changes, both the growth and also the loss. So we come in to this high holidays, hopefully we'll feel a sense of normalcy in our lives, in our communal lives. All right, I want to talk to you about something a little bit more serious, and it involves when I was at Chautauqua this summer on that fateful day. I was walking with my 12-year-old son over there, Boaz. It was the afternoon of the attack on Salman Rushdie, and I felt at a loss for words. It was a beautiful day in a beautiful place. The sun was shining. The campus of the Institute looked spectacular. People of all ages meandered up and down the steep hills of the campus. Yet everything felt wrong. As we walked, we noticed friends consoling one another. Their faces looked sullen, and they spoke in quiet tones like they were sharing a secret. We could both feel the heaviness that hung in the air. Heading down the steep hill of the campus to the Athenaeum Hotel, Boaz began to talk. In rapid succession, in a way only a 12-year-old can, he rattled off a list of all the terrible events that had happened in the past year. The hostage crisis in Colleyville, the invasion of Ukraine, the attack on Tops Friendly Market, the school shooting at Robb Elementary. After each one, I felt a great sadness and anger. It was a lot to take in for me, let alone for my soon-to-be bar mitzvah child. At a certain point, he stopped walking and he turned to me. And I remember this moment so clearly. He said, "Abba, what kind of world are we living in?" In that moment, a moment of terrible grief and loss, my heart broke. Indeed, what kind of world were we living in that people could do such terrible things to one another? I stood momentarily at a loss. Reaching into my bag of rabbinic wisdom, I came up empty. I tried to find words, but there were none. We continued to the hotel, got ready for Shabbat, and headed over to services at Hurlbut Sanctuary. There we were greeted by dozens and dozens of congregants who had been in the auditorium that morning. The question Boaz had just asked me hung in the air like a retort. That night we sang, we cried, we consoled one another. It was clear that neither Chautauqua or any of us would be the same. In the several months that have passed, Boaz, I want you to know I've had a chance to think about the question. And today I'd like to attempt an answer. Not just to you, but to all of you and to myself. I'd like to begin with the words of Salman Rushdie himself. Words that he composed in the Satanic Verses, that book that he wrote more than 30 years ago that made him famous and put his life at risk. How many of you have read the Satanic Verses? It's a wonderful book, and it's not like something you would think would put someone's life at risk. But he wrote there a question. What is the opposite of faith? Not disbelief. Too final, certain, closed. itself a kind of belief. Doubt. Doubt is the opposite of faith. The doubt that Rushdie was writing about was not about whether God exists or what type of religion you believed in or about religion at all. That would be one thing. No, the type of doubt that Rushdie was writing about was much harder and bigger. The type of doubt with much greater and graver consequences. Rushdie's doubt was doubt about everything. Whether the world at the core is good, whether we are good, whether life itself is worthwhile. This is the type of doubt that can easily consume and subsume us. Because when you ask me what kind of world are we living in, I believe this is the type of doubt that you are asking me about. First, I want to let you know that it's okay to express this. All of us, no matter our age, feel this sometimes. Your Ima and I felt this in January when we heard the awful news that our friend Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker was being held hostage in the synagogue in Colleyville. We thought, Colleyville, why on earth would he be attacked down there? It was Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat when we read the Song of the Sea, one of the most joyful Shabbats of the year. Your Ima called me crying after being in contact with Charlie's wife, Adina. How could this be happening? I remember watching your soccer game at the Sportsplex in Tonawanda and feeling bereft. The world around us continued on as normal while our friend's life hung in the balance. This was someone who had danced at our wedding, whose children we'd watched grow. In that moment, our hearts filled with utter fear and terror. We could barely breathe until we heard the news that our friend was going to be okay. I felt that doubt again in March when we invited Reverend Mykola Drojfic of St. John the Baptist Ukraine Catholic Church in Kenmore into our Friday night services, and he stood where I am. It was a month into Russia's invasion of his homeland. He spoke from his heart, asking us to pray for the war to be over as soon as possible. I could see how it was tearing him apart. I felt it as well in May, after the shooting, after hearing about what happened at Tops Friendly Market on Jefferson. Standing the next morning with hundreds of people from all over Buffalo and the country, I could see the tears and the anger. How could someone have done this? I felt it 2 weeks later in learning about the shooting in Uvalde, and I felt it walking with you at Chautauqua. Indeed, as you asked, what kind of world do we live in? But side by side with the fear and doubt, I felt love. I felt hope. Your Ima and I felt those same emotions and our utter joy when we learned the good news that Rabbi Charlie and the other congregants that were being held hostage with him had escaped, and the bravery our friend showed in confronting his assailant with a chair and making it out alive, and the thousands and thousands and thousands of people of all faiths and no faith, ethnicities, nationalities, that gathered around him and his family, his community, to offer support. I felt love and hope in watching our congregant Sheila Bernard Tucker organize a drive of vital supplies to give to Rev Drojfic. I felt love and hope in the work of Molly Carr at Jewish Family Service and all of the resettlement agencies who have helped bring over 200 Ukrainians to Western New York. I felt love and hope in the endless stream of flowers decorating Jefferson Avenue and the more than $5 million raised for the families of victims and others present that day. Love and hope in the lines and lines of people bringing and receiving food on Ferry Street in the weeks after. Boaz, you and I, along with your Ima and siblings, personally delivered food and supplies to Ferry Street. We saw both the seemingly endless line of people needing it and the seemingly endless line of people there to provide it. Doubt, hope, love, and faith. They all exist simultaneously. This is what our friend Wendy K. Smith and her colleague Marianne W. Lewis in their book, Both and Thinking, call a paradox, contradictory yet interdependent elements that exist over time. Like yin and yang, good and evil, happiness and despair, faith and doubt exist simultaneously and continuously. Instead of running away from these contradictions, Wendy and her co-author tell us to run toward them. Doubt has always been there. On Rosh Hashanah, we feel it when we read about Abraham watching Hagar and her son Ishmael disappear into the wilderness. We feel it when we read about Abraham lifting his hand to his son Isaac to sacrifice him on God's command. We feel it in the long, lonely blast of the shofar, both uplifting and deflating at the same time. But hope and love are here with us as well. They are in the voice of the angel directing Hagar and Ishmael to safety. They are in the voice of the angel staying Abraham's hand, sparing Isaac. Doubt and faith, in all fairness to Salman Rushdie, are not opposites. They are interdependent. Inside of doubt, you will find faith. Inside of faith, you will find doubt. In order to be the best human beings that we can be, we need both. In order to make the best possible world we can, we need both. Too much faith, and we will overstep our boundaries and hurt one another. Too much doubt, and we will no longer be able to function in the world. More than most people, Salman Rushdie knew this. He knew this when he first wrote the Satanic Verses. He knew it when he took the stage of the amphitheater on that fateful morning. After more than 30 years of living under a fatwa, of not knowing when or where someone would come for him, Rushdie had a choice to make. Either bunker himself behind walls or live his life despite it. His mere arrival at Chautauqua was a sign of what he had decided. As the Torah tells us in Deuteronomy, "See, I place before you a choice between life and death. Choose life." Rabbi Charlie and his synagogue chose life when they returned to the synagogue services 2 weeks after the hostage crisis. Buffalonians chose life when 2 months and 1 day after the attack at Tops Market, the store reopened to the public. Reb Droifich and his community knew that his fellow countrymen and women chose life when 6 months after the invasion, they still continue to fight. And the people of Uvalde, Texas, chose life when they returned to school 2 weeks ago. Despite everything that he and his family and community endured, our friend Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker continues to declare, we can't be afraid to walk out the door, and we can't be afraid to walk into it. Boaz, you remember at services that night on that Friday night, Chautauqua, I asked for a show of hands who had been in the amphitheater. Of the 100 or so people there, the majority raised their hands. But as shaken as they were, they still came to services to pray, to sing, to laugh, to love. Coming to services this Rosh Hashanah is a sign of our choice as well. Despite everything we have been through, despite all of our questions and doubts, we are here today to pray, to sing, to laugh, to love. I began my answer with a quote from Salman Rushdie, and I will end it with one as well. In a book of essays he published a few years after the fatwa, he wrote about his approach to being a writer. Go for broke. Always try and do too much. Dispense with safety nets. Take a deep breath before you begin talking. Aim for the stars. Keep grinning. Be bloody-minded. Argue with the world, and never forget to keep a hold of the 1,001 things, childhood, certainty, cities, doubts, dreams, instants, phrases, parents, loves, that goes on slipping like sand through our fingers. He was telling us to choose life. Live in the midst of faith and doubt. It is the only meaningful option that we have to a sweet and happy year ahead. Shana Tova U'Metuka. May it be so.